interesting last name. But I don't know if anyone knows anything about my business, but I'm just going to give you a brief overview because it's kind of unconventional. But I grow tulips as cut flowers, and my season is a little bit different. I actually force them and have them throughout the winter, and then we end with a U-pick in the spring, just to celebrate the end of our season. So I started to love tulips because of my grandpa. My business name is Tulip Lane, and my maiden name is Lane, and my grandfather's name was Lane. And he grew tons of tulips in his front yard, and so as a small child, I would walk out my window and see those in the spring and just see these beautiful flowers that look like balloons just floating in the air. And so he really instilled the love of tulips in my heart. And this is his house. It's taken in the 1990s, so he had several beds, but this was one of his smaller beds, actually. So that was the inspiration behind what I started doing. But when my husband is in the military, in the reserves, and he got mobilized to Germany several years ago, and so we went over there, and we were there in the springtime, and I said, we have to go to the Netherlands. While we're here, we can't miss this opportunity. So when I was supposed to be planning the trip, I got distracted, and I started wondering where cut flowers come from. So I didn't know anything. It just kind of, the question popped in my head, and instead of actually working on deciding what we were going to do while we were in the Netherlands, I was like, where are these flowers coming in? How do you grow these flowers? And just all these questions. And so I learned that close to 80% of the cut flowers that are sold in the US are actually imported, which was pretty shocking to me because I'd never given it much thought. But does anyone, I know some of you may have seen my presentation before, but does anyone know where most of our cut flowers come from? Any idea? Nobody? Nobody?
Would it be Holland?
We do get cut flowers from there, but it's actually a very small percentage. The number one place is Colombia. Ecuador is right behind them. So they make up like a huge portion of the pie. I can't remember what percentage, but it's most of the pie. And then the Netherlands, Canada, and Mexico make up a smaller portion of that pie. So I think it's interesting because those flowers that are coming from those countries are kept cold from the time they're cut to the time that they get to your table. So there's just this amazing logistics and infrastructure behind the cut flower industry. And I think it's really interesting to think about how we got here, because obviously we didn't always have this, we weren't importing all these flowers. Originally cut flowers were grown in and around urban areas because that's where the demand was. They were a luxury product, and there just wasn't a way to keep them cold, and get them or bring them in from rural areas. So a lot of the flower farms were in and around urban areas, but that started changing in the mid-1900s whenever JFK created something called the Alliance for Progress, and it was to promote trade with South America, and that started the infancy of cut flowers. And then in 1991, in 1991 they created the Andean Trade Preference Act, which eliminated tariffs because they were trying to curb drug trafficking and drug production. So they created this trade act. And when they created it, obviously it created stable jobs, good incomes for these people. Cut imports soared in the US, but there's always like a double-edged sword with anything like that. And by 1992, close to 60% of the US domestic cut flower growers actually went out of business. So it really had, it just turned up, just upended everything. I don't want to demonize imports because they really do make up the backbone of the industry. But about with them. There's a lot of unregulated chemical and pesticide use, and there's a lot of harsh labor conditions for the workers. Most of the workers are actually women, and they have found that they have a significantly higher rate of miscarriages, birth defects, and premature births because of working among these chemicals. And they're also bringing their children to these farms where it's not regulated, the chemical use, and their children are being exposed because they're working really long hours leading up to the holidays. So one thing you can do if you're buying flowers, maybe at the grocery store, is look for something called the Vera Flora label. And that's a third party or an independent company that's gone in and verified that these companies are using safe labor practices, safe handling of chemicals and pesticides, and better labor conditions. I've actually looked in Paducah, and I've not ever seen anything with the Vera Flora label, so it's hard for me to tell you guys to look at that, but if you're in a bigger city, I know some people like to go to Whole Foods and get flowers, or Trader Joe's. You can find that there, or they even have domestic flowers there as well. But just something to think about if you're buying flowers. But, and you might ask why I would even bother growing flowers since there's so many affordable imports. Why would I even bother growing them? But there's a lot of domestic cut flower farmers popping up now. It's a big trend right now, and some of the way that domestic growers can compete are up here. One of the things is growing unique flowers. So anything that I try to grow, the tulips specifically is what I try to focus on. I look for parrot tulips, double tulips, French varieties, things that you wouldn't find in a grocery store or at a wholesaler. Some growers will actually focus on things that don't ship well, like a dahlia or anemones, things like that. And it's actually, well, I'll get to that in a second. And then also flowers with fragrance, garden roses, or I know that's not the proper term for the type of rose that they grow, but I'm not a rose expert, but think roses that have smell, they'll focus on growing, or sweet peas or things like that. But it's actually interesting because people will go to the florist and get flowers, and they'll be excited to get their flowers and take a big whiff of them. And if they're imported flowers, they're not going to have a smell because the growers are actually requesting from breeders to breed flowers that don't have a fragrance because they've learned, because they have such a long trip to get to you, when a flower produces a fragrance, it's actually expending a lot of its energy, and so half of that energy gets burned up while it's in transit to you, so they're actually breeding the smell out of flowers, which seems really unromantic to me, but so anyway, and another benefit of purchasing locally grown flowers is, I can't say it's with every grower, but most of the growers that I come across are they're very particular about what they're putting on their flowers and in their ground. They're handling it, their families are handling it, they're just really particular about it. And you also get a fresher flower. Some of those flowers that are coming and getting imported, a lot of them are probably a week to 10 days old by the time you get them, if not closer to 3 weeks old. So I know when I'm selling my flowers, I try to get them out within 48 hours of actually cutting them. So, but this is the more interesting part of, I'm just going to talk a little bit about how we grow, and then after that, I'm going to do just a little planter demonstration. I love to plant bulbs in planters, so I'm going to do something with that. But when we're growing for cut flowers, we do 3 different methods. We grow in the ground, just like you would in your garden. And there's a big downside to that. You're growing it in the ground, it's going to come up the same time every year, the end of March through the middle of April. And I have no control over it. And the other way that we grow is via hydroponics. The beauty of that is that I get to dictate when the flowers are going to bloom. And then we also do crate forcing, which is very similar to hydroponics. I'm able to dictate when those flowers bloom as well. So I've got a little video here on how we grow hydroponically. So you can see I've got the plant time here when I'm planting hydroponically. We plant in November and December. I'm planting weekly, every week, successions of tulips. And from the time they're planted to the time they bloom, it takes 35 days, which is a really quick turnaround. So. About the brightness of it. Okay, well, you might just have to watch it this way then. So anyway, all right, let's start again. Okay, sorry. We've got it like all messed up here. Okay. All right. Anyway, so it takes about 35 days for them to bloom from the time they're planted to the time of flower. So that dark area is it's a bulb crate. And you can see if you look closely, there's there are these little spikes that are poking up. There's hundreds of them in those crates, and I take tulips and I spear them onto those spikes. And so I'll fill that crate up, and then I fill it with water. And it takes about 2 weeks for them to root out and get top growth. And once they're that way, I know I can bring them into my grow space. And they really take off once they're under lights and in a warm area. And they have buds by 30 days. And then just a few days later, they are ready to bloom. So this was actually my first trial of hydroponics. And the first time I did it, they bloomed on Christmas Day, which was a really cool Christmas present. So that's hydroponics.
Is this like a greenhouse at your home?
I told you it's really unconventional. And I was not joking when I said that. So I have some like flower coolers that I use to help me in this process because they do have to stay cold. But I grow in my basement. And I grow, it's amazing what you can do in a small space. I grow about 13,000 over the course of like indoors, like 13 weeks. So it's pretty interesting. If only I had a bigger space. But, and then this is crate forcing. It's similar to hydroponics, but everything's planted at one time. So they all get planted in November, and I bring them out in successions every week once they're ready, and they're blooming anywhere from mid-January all the way through the end of March. So this is what we do with that. So when I say crates, I'm talking about the crates that the bulbs are actually shipped in. I get new bulbs every year, and they come in these black crates that you see. And we clean them, and we add pro mix to them, and then we can fit about 66 crates this year I'm shooting for about 17 weeks of tulips. So we started with about 3 weeks when I started doing this, and now we're up to 17 weeks, which is pretty cool. So, and then when we harvest, again, you're not showing. There we go. When we harvest, we look for something called kissing bud stage. So if you look at some of those, they're not colored on the most outer edges. They're more colored at the tips. It looks like they've put on lipstick and they're puckering up. That's what we're looking for when we're picking them. It's going to give them the longest face life. And this is true with your flowers in your garden that you're cutting to bring inside early in the morning. Cutting is ideal because they're the most hydrated. And if you can't do that, then evening is better. You never want to cut in the middle of the day because they're dehydrated and they're stressed in the heat. So, and one of the things that's interesting about tulips is you can harvest them with the bulb attached and actually keep them in your refrigerator or cooler and bring them out like you do a peony. I don't know if any of you guys have ever tried that with peonies. You can pick them when they're in a bud stage and keep them in your refrigerator wrapped up and bring them out if you need them like 2 or 3 weeks later and they'll still bloom and look beautiful. You can also do that with a tulip. It will significantly decrease their vase life, but if you have an event or something like a baby shower, I get people asking me stuff like that all the time. You can actually do that, and it's a fun experiment. So, but that's a picture of them with the bulb attached. They look pretty funny, kind of like something out of Dr. Seuss's books, a little bit. But I don't love to do it this way, but if I have to, I will sometimes. If the stems are really short and they're in the ground, it can give you an extra 5 inches of stem length. So that's a little trick. And then I just want to talk a little bit about supporting local growers. There's a lot of us popping up. You can shop your farmers markets. You can purchase CSAs or subscriptions. I do a winter tulip subscription, which is great for Christmas, great for birthdays or Valentine's Day, any of that. It's really fun to share that with our community. And then you can also request local flowers from your florist. But we do tulip bouquets, we do subscriptions, we sell bulbs in the fall, which our bulb sales will actually start at the end of October. And you can, if you're interested, you can visit our website and look at that. We'll have local pickup, or I'll even ship. We do holiday amaryllis, and you can find us at Midtown Market. We sell out of our home in town. We sell the local florist, and then we also have the U-Pick where we are planning to plant 50,000 tulips this year. So it's a great way to just, on a spring day, whenever you've been stuck inside all winter, just to come out and spend it with your family. You can do a picnic. You can take pictures, pick flowers. We wrap them for you and tell you how to care for them. So anyway, does anyone have any questions on that before I start doing the planter at all?
So you put them in the ground in November?
Yeah, I start my ground plantings at the end of October. So, yeah, you'll see bulbs out right now at the retailers. You can plant them now. It's just ideal to wait until the ground has cooled off and is about below 50 degrees, which is normally at the end of October. Because you don't want them to set like green growth on top, and when that soil's warm, it makes them do that. So you want to wait until the soil's cold, and they'll start setting roots.
How deep do you plant them?
I try to plant them deep enough that the squirrels don't get them, which squirrels are shallow diggers. So they will dig anywhere about 4 inches and below about 4 inches. So as long as I get them under that, I'm pretty happy. Yeah, Lori?
Why don't you reuse your bulbs?
That's probably one of my most common questions. Because when I'm growing them for cut flowers, I take the stem stem, the leaves, the flower, I take everything, and so that bulb has no way to regenerate the following season. If I wanted to baby it for 2 or 3 years, then it would probably regenerate, but it's not,
Yeah,
you know, it's just really time consuming. So, cause just like with your daffodils, you know, they say leave that greenery on
Right.
at the end of the season and let it die back, it's the same. I've taken all that greenery, so it has no way to do that.
Yeah, what type of soil do you use? Organic, inorganic?
Are you talking about like when I'm planting outside? Or
Yeah, outdoors, because I plant all mine outdoors this year.
The soil that is in the ground.
Well,
I don't do anything to it.
well, I use inorganic soil.
Yeah.
That's Canadian sphagnum peat,
Yeah.
vermiculite, perlite, and mycorrhiza, which helps hold the moisture and the nutrients in the soil.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna try to get a pair of gloves so I don't get infected from the tulip. Is that right?
When we're planting, like you saw me planting in the crates with the bulbs, that I'm forcing in the wintertime, I do use a pro mix, which is a mix of peat moss and all those other things. But for outdoor ground planting, I just dig a hole and I throw them in.
Can you change the color of the tulip?
That really is affected by temperature. So whether, how cold our winter is, can really affect the color of a tulip. So like, I don't know that I have, I don't think I have a picture. Oh, this one right here. So this tulip right here, it's called cartouche, it's my favorite tulip. And it can change, like one winter I'll plant it and it'll be like, by the end of the season, just washed in hot pink. And if we've had a really mild, warm winter, it will be just cream with just this little tip. So the temperature can really affect the color of the tulip.
I use food color.
Oh, you're talking about dyeing.
I can change the culture of a lily.
Uh-huh.
I can change a white gardenia to green or yellow.
Yeah.
And I didn't know you could adapt it to a tulip because I haven't grown them before, and I'll have over 300 pink ones this year in my garden.
Yeah. It'll be a fun experiment. Anybody else?
Since the blooming season in those is so much earlier than most of the other blooming things around here, do you have a pest problem?
So whenever I first just started growing them at my house, I didn't, because I would plant them 5 inches, at least 4 to 5 inches deep, if not more. The squirrels wouldn't get in them. I didn't have any issues with mice. The squirrels would dig around in the soil, but they would never take a tulip. And I also like the crates that I grow them in. Sometimes if I can't get them into storage right away, because they're really heavy, my husband helps me with that a lot. But if I can't get them in storage right away, I'll leave them sitting outside, and the squirrels will get in there and they'll start digging around. I have, after five seasons, I have yet to see them. 4 seasons, I have yet to see them take a tulip. So, and I've grown a lot of tulips. So, we do have an issue with deer with the U-pick, but we have a 3D fence is what they call it, and that keeps them out. So far, no major issues with bulbs, just a few little nips here and there with the deer.
What's a 3D fence?
It's basically 2 fences, so the interior fence is a tall, like 8-foot fence, it's electric. And then the exterior fence is short, like maybe this tall, and it's also electric. But it's not, I mean, the deer can like wiggle its way through it if he wants. But once they get in, it messes with their depth perception is what they say, and so they just kind of steer clear of it. So. About it. All right. I'm gonna take this out of here. So, to layer them, because then you only have to water one pot, or two if you've got a friend on your steps. And, it's a lot easier to clean around if you don't like all, stuff collecting around your pots. And then you get more out of just one pot. You're gonna get, a longer show. So, the idea is, you're gonna put your, later blooming bulbs at the bottom, and as you progress up to the top, you layer it with soil, and then you go up towards the top to get your mid-season bulbs, and then at the very, very top, it's gonna be your earliest season bulbs. So, a general guideline is your bigger bulbs are gonna be on bottom, your smaller bulbs are gonna be on top. That's not a hard and fast rule, but I do have this calendar here. You can kind of see it's kind of it gives a spring, just kind of how everything blooms throughout the spring, all the different bulbs, and how they relate to one another with their timing. And I guess, I think that's kind of hard to see. You start with your snowdrops, you got crocus, anemone blonda, muscari, tulips, more like a species tulip, other types of tulips, fosteriana, hyacinth, daffodils, your later blooming tulips, fritillaria, and it goes on until you get to the allium. So what I try to do with the bulb lasagna is I'm going to pick between 2 and 4 varieties of these, and then again, like I said, you plant your latest blooming ones first, and then you work your way up to your earliest. And just when you're thinking about it and what you're picking, you're going to need less of whatever's down here because it's more narrow and they're bigger bulbs. And then as you work your way up, you're going to need more because they're smaller bulbs and you've obviously got more surface area. So, I start with, I do not, for this, I wouldn't recommend putting gravel in the bottom. I know a lot of people put something like gravel in the bottom to help with drainage, but because you have so many layers, you really need that space. So I start with a really fancy coffee filter so that, the water can permeate, but your soil's not gonna leak through. And I have picked 4 different bulbs. I have gotten these at the hardware store because I don't have bulbs yet for this year, but I've picked out a mid to late season tulip, an early daffodil, and then I've got muscari, and then crocus is what I have. And so I should have about 3 nice successions of flowers blooming. I don't want mine to bloom all at once, so I've really kind of spaced out where they all are on that calendar. Back here, I use that calendar to kind of guide me. And you can Google a calendar like this online, just a bulb calendar. It's not anything unique, but anyway, so I'll start with my coffee filter, and then I put about 2 inches to 3 inches of soil at the bottom. And I have already, I don't know how you guys do your planters, but I've actually already got my soil wet because some of this, like pro mix and stuff, is really hydrophobic, and you can water and you can water and water and you will never get it thoroughly wet. So I think it's easier to just do it this way, and you really want whatever you have at the bottom to be wet because that's going to start the rooting process. If it doesn't have that water, they're just going to desiccate and avoid their buds. So anyway, I've got my 2 to 3 inches here, and I'm just going to dump in my tulips. I've got about 16 that are going in, and they can be really close together. You just don't want them to touch. So I throw them in.
Is there a right side up on the bulb?
So tulips and bulbs in general, they always say point with the top up. And so far, I have planted, I'm trying to think, over 100,000 tulips, and when we put them in the ground, I between them, like an inch, just so those tulips from underneath can kind of find their way a little bit easier. Honestly, their stems are so sturdy, they're probably just gonna push them out of the way, but I will leave some space for them. And then another layer, just like lasagna, and it's a lot quicker. I don't have to boil noodles. So, and then I'm gonna use my mascari, because those, they're a little bit later than the crocus, but they're super tiny. Some people call them great hyacinth. So that's what that is. But technically it's not a true hyacinth. So I'll put those in and I'll leave a little space so the other bulbs can come up. But again, you know, they're strong enough from underneath, they're probably gonna push their way through anyway. So. Would anyone like to volunteer to help me finish this off, and I can go through some other things? Any volunteers?
Oh, I'll help you.
I was gonna say, I'm gonna call Lori. Someone like to come up here.
I want to be your Padawan learner.
Just kind of sprinkle those throughout and then put another 2 to 3 inches in. Start with those. So once you get your bulbs layered in, you want to finish with about 2 to 3 inches of soil and just water really, really thoroughly because they need that to set roots. And then you can top it with whatever you have on hand, pine straw, pine needles, straw, you know, whatever you have, it's just going to keep that soil moist. And so a key thing to this is storage throughout the winter because you want to give them the opportunity to get cold. Like they are spring bulbs like the cold, and they actually need the cold to vernalize and produce a flower. So I store mine in a garage, in an unheated garage, and I'll put a piece of plywood over the top to keep out rodents or anything like that. And I usually water anywhere between 2 to 3 times during the course of the winter. And then if you just want to keep yours outside, don't leave it in a sunny spot because it's going to make that temperature inside spike. Place it next to your house. You want it to stay cold, but you also don't want it to freeze because that's going to cause your bulbs to desiccate. So, and then another key thing is putting them up on something, your planter, feet, or pallet or something so that it doesn't freeze to the ground. And then also cover that with plywood so you keep the rodents out. And then once you start getting about 2 to 3 inches of top growth, then you can bring it outside and just, again, don't let it dry out. So, and then if you've got anything that's perennial in there, like daffodils, mascari, crocus, you can actually let all that foliage die back, hold off on the water once it's done blooming, and then in the fall you can plant them in your ground. And I will add the caveat that they do get stressed in a planter. It's a stressful environment for any plant, so it might take them, they might not flower the next year, but if it's a daffodil or a mascari or hyacinth or something, they're pretty reliable and they should bloom again. So, is that it? That's it. Thank you. Any questions at all, or?
Tell me this, so when would you put all that together in that pot?
I would definitely wait until it cools off. End of October, beginning of November. November, but I have planted, I don't advise this, but I've bought my bulbs, you know, I get those beginning of November and I forget about them sometimes. And, I planted them out in, February and potted them up and they've still bloomed. The key is that I kept them cold by keeping them outside in my garage or in the cooler or something, so. But ideally, you wanna do it November, beginning of November, once it's cooled off. So, sorry, I get a little, too much information sometimes.
And when did you say you move it outside?
Once there's about 2 to 3 inches of
So you just have to
sprouts.
keep peeking under the.
Yeah, it's normally like the beginning of February-ish,
Okay.
something like that. Yeah.
So if you buy bulbs now at Lowe's or somewhere, they all have the bulbs, and you don't plant them till the end of the month, is there a certain way you need to store them in a cool spot, or it's just?
I mean, if you have them now, I would just, the best thing you can do is just go on ahead and plant them. But you can also put them in your, like if you have a spare refrigerator in your garage or
Okay.
something.
Just keep
But
them cool.
definitely away from fruits and vegetables,
Okay.
because bulbs are like fruit. They're actually, I think they're different than fruit in that there's a live embryo flower in there, and they can be really affected by ethylene, which is what is released from fruits and vegetables. And so if they are trapped in a refrigerator with a lot of ethylene, it can make that flower abort. So either plant them immediately or you can put them in a cooler away from fruits and vegetables.